Hi, I'm Susan Cawley, and welcome to You're Not Alone Surviving Your Child's Disability. Advocating for your child with a disability to acquire essential services and supports can be challenging and sometimes exhausting. Here to discuss advocacy and other opportunities for assistance in this endeavor are Ellen Scoggins, parent and educational advocate, Elizabeth Bostick, advocate, parent coach, and president SPAN, and Leo Sarkeesian, executive director, the ARC of Massachusetts. Hi, how is everybody today?
Great.
Good.
Good. Now, my first question is, what is the purpose of an advocate for children with disabilities? And would you like to start, Ellen?
Sure. The purpose of an educational advocate is to work with the families and the student to figure out what services or programming a student would need to be successful.
Great. Now, is there another type of advocate that you want to talk about besides educational advocates, or
Sure.
Leo?
I mean, well, one of the, we're focusing on schools today, probably, and kids, and eventually talking about adult services. There's two types. I mean, there's a personal, individual advocacy that's important. That's what makes things work on the human level. And then there's systems advocacy that hopefully gets laws passed, budgets passed, that allow for people to get the supports and services they need. So that would be the two big categories.
Beth, would you like to add anything to that?
Well, I think in addition to what Ellen was saying, it's not only determining what services a child might need in school, but then also helping a parent to be able to navigate through special education law effectively. Because as you said, it's a lot to manage just having a child with special needs, but then when you add a 388-page document of laws and regulations, sometimes it's not that the parent doesn't always know what a child needs, it's that they don't know how to get there.
Right.
So we actually help
Good
them
point.
steer the course.
Right. Now, what should an advocate be trained and knowledgeable about? Is there some type of training that goes along with being a professional advocate?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, they need to know the law.
Right.
And so there are a number of places that you can go to actually get that kind of training. The Federation offers a course, the 8-week parent consultant course that you can participate in. Rights Law offers a couple of boot camps. William and Mary has a great program as well that's a week-long program. You can get training through COPA, the Council of Parents and Paralegal Attorneys, or Parent Attorneys, I forget the exact name of it, but that's another place where you can get training. So really the key is really knowing and understanding the law, getting the training, doing your own investigation, getting the regulations yourself, and really becoming well-versed in it.
Did you want to say anything about that, Ellen?
That was
Ellen,
pretty
you
comprehensive.
Well, I was going to say, I would add, and both these individuals are very good at it, it's also a relational aspect. So you better know your law, you better know, and sometimes you probably have to look it up, both of you, right? Because it is so, it's so broad. But I think there's a relational piece, and you have to make a decision, what kind of advocate do you need? Usually you want an advocate that's collaborative at first, unless, you're in a terrible situation. And then even if someone's collaborative, like both of these individuals, they might say, you know what, we're going to have to be much more adversarial in this situation because they haven't even done step one for your son or daughter. And that's outrageous. And that doesn't happen that often anymore, but there are situations. I knew a story about a 16-year-old, and I still can't. I met with the parents through a friend of a friend. Said, hey, could you visit with them? And smart people, and they knew people, but a psychiatrist had said, you know what, your daughter's not going to become a rocket scientist. She doesn't want to go to high school. Just pull her out of school, have her stay at home. She gained an additional 100 pounds during that period.
Oh,
of course, the
my
school didn't argue
goodness.
about it, right? And by the time I met them, unfortunately, this was like 6 years later. 7 years, might have even been 7 years later. But it's just an example of what can happen. And that's nowadays, I mean, that was within the last decade and I said, that's a real old school psychiatrist that really shouldn't be even
Practicing.
practicing with anyone with special needs, let alone typical, people.
That's awful.
Yeah, so that's an extreme example, but in school systems, there's the struggle between budgets and doing the right thing, and hopefully there's people that want to do the right thing, and they may end up even dropping hints, to a parent.
Well, what do you think is the difference? Oh, did you want to say something?
And I think you need to be a skilled negotiator.
Absolutely.
So depending upon the situation, you just, you need to sway them, no matter if it's adversarial or collaborative or That's very important as well.
Now, I know we touched on this already a little bit, but I want to be clear about what are the differences between a parent who is advocating for their child and a professional advocate.
So it's the difference between the verb versus the noun, so to speak.
Yeah.
I think a parent who's advocating for their child is speaking on behalf of their child, trying to bring issues to the table to help people to see what the needs are. And so they may not necessarily know the law or know how it applies, but they are definitely speaking on their behalf. They're advocating for them.
Right.
And I think any of us who has somebody that they care about and sees them in a situation that may not be best for them, we've all done it in some shape, form, or fashion.
Right.
A person who has the role of an advocate is actually kind of taking those skills to a different level. So they're applying law, they're applying outside services and other resources, and kind of pulling all of that together and creating a package that really helps bring a group of people together and hopefully will build consensus around what's the right thing to do and how to go about doing it. So on some levels, it's kind of like operationalizing the very concept that might be in that parent to begin with, but really figuring out how to give it legs and how to do it effectively.
Right. So you're saying a professional advocate can do that? Can
Very often
pretty
can do
much.
that, yeah, because I think
Okay.
that the professional advocate also has the benefit of not being emotionally invested.
Right, I was
I
going
was
to
gonna
say that
add
as
You know,
well.
so I am a very good advocate for a lot of parents, and
Mm-hmm.
I can become a mess in my own child's IEP meeting. It's a very different thing when it's your own child, and
Mm-hmm.
so sometimes when you're in that emotional state, even if you're skilled and have all of that knowledge, it's hard to retrieve it
Yeah.
because your emotions are getting in the way. So having a person there who can hear the information as it was intended, or be able to pull information from a number of resources and help people to be able to hear each other and negotiate effectively, is really where the advocate becomes a real partner in the process.
Right.
And it can also, the advocate can help preserve the relationship between the school and the parent. Sometimes you can be the bad guy, and because
Great
you know
point.
you're in it for a number of years, maybe up till 22, and you want that relationship to work with the parent. So sometimes an advocate can take a step back and make sure it's working, and if necessary, be the bad guy in the process.
The diplomatic bad guy.
Oh, good. Anyway, just to touch on something that you just said, is a parent more likely to hire an advocate for a short period of time, or is it more beneficial, obviously, to hire an advocate for the long run, but possibly because of funding or something like that,
Sure.
they might not be able to. So what would you recommend a parent, the most important part, or that they should have an advocate for?
So often a parent will call you when they're in crises, so you would help them, you know, at that time and figure out what you needed to move forward. In addition to that, once you've resolved that crisis, you know, many of my clients, I might go to the annual meeting, or they would call you as needed. So it's a relationship. You could be needed in the short term to help figure out a crisis situation, and typically I would be invited to the progress meetings or yearly meetings if the student was getting the services they needed.
Yeah, I think it varies from parent to parent. The thing that I've been noticing, and I'm sure you've probably noticing this too, more and more parents, I'm getting less of the calls of parents who are in crisis, and more parents who have decided early on that they're going to need someone to help them navigate the process, which is a nice shift, I think. It doesn't mean that there aren't crises happening out there. I still get those calls too, but
Yeah.
more and more parents are hiring advocates as consultants because they're just kind of, they've decided, I'm just going to need some help doing this. There's just too much, and so so they very often will ask you to help out with, well, what should I expect, and what should I do, and what's realistic, and what should I ask for, and what shouldn't I ask for, and what other things do I need to do in the meantime, and to understand the process. So I'm finding that my relationships with parents tend to go over many years, but the level of involvement will shift. very often. In the beginning, it'll be a lot. And then
yeah.
after that, if I'm doing my job effectively, I've almost worked myself out of a job. But I'm just there to help them in case they need questions and to really act as their consultant often in the background. And I may appear at the annual meeting or the progress meeting, or I may show up again when there are more critical transitions, like when a child moves from elementary school to middle school. That's a big jump in terms of expectations and what the environment's going to look like, or from middle school to high school. So in those places, then I may actually spend more time with the parents because there's a different level of emphasis and shifting often of the focus of the IEP at that point.
Right. And don't you think also that a parent gets overwhelmed, especially as more involved the child is? And I know that I personally have 2 autistic daughters, and I became extremely overwhelmed just trying to take care of them, never mind having to navigate the system and get all the things done that I needed to get done. And I'm sure a lot of parents feel that way.
Absolutely.
Does anybody want to say anything else about that?
Well, I was thinking about one of the big areas is transition, from what
Yes.
Beth said. And one of the things at the ARC, and we're primarily an advocacy organization, but we also provide some hard services and chapters of the ARC. Most of them would refer to educational advocates. Some have their own, but I want to focus on the transition age, which starts still in Massachusetts at 14 legally. And why is that important? Because that's supposed to look at what's life going to be like when you're an adult. What are the skills that you're developing? How does that relate to living in the community? So when Beth mentions the transition to middle school and high school, a lot of times parents don't realize it might be a good idea to step back before, even as you're in the middle of middle school, before your child's 14, because you may make a decision in high school that's the wrong decision for what the best course for your son or daughter is. So there's things like that. So it's really helpful too for parents. And again, people are busy, so I
Right.
get that, to learn as much as they can. We have a fact sheet on transition on the web. The other thing, when we get to it, we also have some people called support brokers who actually develop person-centered plans. And that's a fee-for-service program we decided to do because we wanted people
Right.
to have independent people, like educational advocates, that are independent, work for the family for that area too. But transition, it's really, one point at middle school, before your child's 14, before you pick a high school, really
Yeah.
factor in what do you think, he or she loves to do, desires, interests, but also is going to fit his or her aptitudes and what she can learn and he can learn over the next few
Right,
years.
and wouldn't it also depend on what direction you're leaning towards? I mean, whether they're going to try to be independent or or have to be in a group home or possibly have to live at home.
Yes and no. Okay,
Yes and no?
yes and no, because I would argue all of us have our gifts and abilities. So yes, someone may have significant impediments, or they could have a situation where they're going to need 24-hour supervision because they can't be left alone in a home, as you bring up.
Right.
But the flip side is that person does have things that they're going to thrive on and enjoy, whether they can verbally express it or not. And are we seeing those things? Are we looking at it from his and her perception? And it's hard to do. Parents are sometimes the best people. Siblings are sometimes great at doing it too.
Right.
So no, I think it's important because you can end up in a group home, sit around every night eating potato chips and watching
True.
TV, and that's not a good life.
But that's where an advocate would come into play as well, wouldn't it? I mean,
I think once you have a plan, negotiating. Some advocates
Right.
might do both, but that's the support broker folks do the planning and stuff like that, and there's other people out there that do that. Some agencies have person-centered planning people.
Right.
The State Department of Development Services has a few, that do planning. But I think the plan's the first piece that I think families should embrace and worry about who are those people that are going to help me do this. And that might be more of a different topic, so I won't go too far down that road, but I do believe it cuts across skill level and impairment level and all of that.
what you mentioned that there are alternatives to possibly not, and I'm not saying that being a professional advocate is a great thing, I think, but sometimes parents can't afford it. Are there options for parents or alternatives for parents to go to if they can't go to an advocate?
Well, the Federation does offer pro bono advocates as part of their training process. You have to do, I think, 25 hours or 50 hours pro bono work. So they're a great resource. Mass Advocates for Children also has referrals for pro bono advocates or attorneys.
And Disability Law Center.
Disability Law Center.
The other thing, if you have a chapter of the ARC or a family supports, well, everyone's got a family support center in their area.
Right.
You would want to, so some of the chapters actually have clinics where educational advocates like Ellen
Right.
and Beth come for free
Great.
Right.
to talk, and maybe they get clients, and maybe they end up getting sucked in to do some pro bono work, which happens. I'm sure they've both done that. So I would call a chapter. If the chapter doesn't do, they should refer you. But also a family support center, which is on the web, mass.gov/DDS. You know, you're able to find out who your family support center agency is in your area and see if they do anything like that, because there should be some, you know, it's not going to be the same as hiring your own
Right.
education. Let's be honest, you know, it's not.
Right, it
but
isn't
but
the
at
same.
least as a resource.
But
And then also, you know, everyone's got friends. Will another parent come with you at least
Right.
to the session, right? What are things you guys suggest? Because I'm sure you have to do.
I had to pull people in off the street, as
Yeah.
long as you bring someone.
Just bring another body. But I mean, the IEP clinics are something that are becoming more and more popular, and different agencies do it in different ways. So LifeLinks and eMark, for example, will have someone like myself come and sit down with a parent, and it would only be a $25 an hour fee, as opposed to what a typical adult would advocate would cost.
Right.
I know SNARC, for example, does a whole day
Yeah,
of
Wow.
an
That's
IEP
great.
clinic, and they'll have
Yeah,
anywhere
that's what
between
Johnny did.
15 and 20 advocates, and they're scheduled throughout the day, and it gives you an opportunity to do it at a time that works for you. One of the newest initiatives of the Special Needs Advocacy Network is that we are offering IEP clinics as for different organizations to host. So the Danvers
that's great.
Danvers CPAC is going to be doing that soon.
Wow.
We're going to be doing that at HAFI, the Haitian American Public Health Institute. We're partnering with SNARC and is supporting their day of IEP clinics. And it really serves two purposes. It allows parents who may not have the financial resources to be able to have that 1 hour or sometimes 2 hour consultation at very little cost. It also gives us as an organization that SPAN the opportunity to pair up more seasoned advocates with junior advocates. So it's a real mentorship program.
Wow.
So it really presents a win-win situation for
Oh,
everybody.
yeah, definitely.
So we're very excited about
I
that.
think that's great. I wish I knew about that when I was, when my kids were young, because I didn't have very much help. Anyway, in selecting an advocate, what do you think are the qualities a parent should look for?
Oh boy, there's a loaded question.
I think, one of the things I tell families is it's really, the relationship has to work. So you want
Okay.
someone versed in the laws and knowledgeable and a skilled negotiator, and you want the relationship with the parents and the advocate to be fruitful.
Yeah.
Right.
You want someone who's going to be child-focused. You don't want the person who is doing this because they happen to have a negative experience and they're out there to take on the world and make sure nothing ever happens to another child like that again. I mean, and the irony of it is that most advocates went into the business largely because of their own experiences,
right.
But it doesn't necessarily have to come from a negative place. So you want to make sure that someone really is going to focus in on the child. You want someone who's versed in the law, as Ellen said, who's very child-focused, who can negotiate, who's going to be honest with you, is not going to tell you, not going to promise you something that they can't deliver on, and not tell you something that you want to hear. There are
Right.
times when I have had parents and I just say, I'm about to tell you something you're not going to want to hear right now, but this is the reality of what you can expect and what we need to do at this point.
Right.
And finding someone whose personality will work well with yours. There are many really good advocates out there, and many of us have very different working styles. So you find one that works well for you, so that that you have a balanced team. And do things like check references, find out more about them from other people. You want somebody who the school district respects and isn't going to necessarily run away from, because again, you want to keep that collaborative relationship.
So where would you go? Would you go to the school department to find, they wouldn't necessarily tell you what advocates are around the area, would they?
Well, it's interesting.
That's kind of...
It may actually, no,
it's kind of a...
I will be honest, I've had SPED directors or teachers who have literally referred parents to me because they knew that I would help them help the team move forward. So it may not be an advertisement on the SPED website.
Right, right.
But it does happen. But I mean, the places that you can go to find advocates, you can go to the Federation for Children with Special Needs. They keep a database of all the people that they've trained. The SPAN directory is a great directory, and those are people who are not only advocates, but have committed to a certain level of ethics and standards and a commitment to ongoing professional development. You can Google people and then do some investigation as to whether or not they might be a good fit. Talk to other parents. Other parents may have used advocates very successfully. Your local ARCs are a great place where people know of who's in the area and who's been successful, because some people may specialize in certain disabilities.
Right.
Some people may just be in this particular town and know all of the systems and the players really, really well.
Yeah, I think that's another piece. I think you guys named like 4 or 5 criteria, and the other one is, though, someone may just understand supports and services better around ASD or around
Right, a different
certain
disability,
medical
different
complex kids
disabilities.
Yeah, medically complex conditions.
Yeah.
Kids who need significant physical adjustments and accommodations. So that's good to know too. You know, I think.
Absolutely.
I don't think you always need that, but I mean, you might need that in the very beginning, right, to get your head around.
Or just to know what to ask. You don't know
Yeah.
what questions to ask sometimes.
Now, if a parent chooses to be an advocate, or if she hires an advocate, what type of information do they need to gather to be known or to be kept, so that when they do go to IEP meetings or ISP meetings, they have all the information they need to advocate?
Wow, you should keep all your tests. I'll tell you, there's stuff around testing and evaluations, especially ones that you feel were really well done, that describe what the right supports are, good recommendations. You want to always keep those. I would think you want to keep your communications. These guys will tell you, right, with the school.
Oh, absolutely.
So why don't you guys pick
Keep
it up from there?
everything,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah, any evaluations, core evaluations, IEPs, anything that would be helpful or that gives a good picture of the student.
And if you've been
Progress
trying to get
reports.
recommendations met, though, and you've had conversation with the SPED director, it's good to put down, hey, this is the date.
Right.
We talked about X, because, I'll never, again, this is an old story, a young lady with Prader-Willi, this is going back quite a few years. The special ed director, when it went to negotiation, who's going to pay for what, because she was now at a residential school, he was claiming I never spoke to him about, this was when I was a young social worker, about this young lady, and asked him to participate in an after-home funding, after school. And he was lying, unfortunately, and they never brought me in. I don't know if it would have mattered, have one person's word against another. But so it's good to document, those things. I wish I had documented it in the file, so because then when someone does work with you, a special ed advocate or an educational advocate or regular advocate for adults, you have that information. Oh my God, you talked to them 3 times. And,
Right.
Yeah.
No, I had that happen today. They said, when did you request an independent? And I was like, here's my meeting notes from May. Would you like a copy? And,
Right.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
What level of supports and services will be required by an advocate when a child who is disabled enters the adult world at age 22?
So say that again. I apologize. I missed
That's
the first
okay.
part.
What level of supports and services will be required by an advocate when a child who is disabled enters the adult world at age
So
22?
when you say level of support and services, what the advocate's got to provide
Yes,
to the family?
what an advocate will be
Okay.
providing for the family.
So we were talking about transition earlier, right? And it's like a different world, the adult service system. It's, you're no longer, like in school systems, you're talking about an LEA, local educational authority, right? There's a SPED director, that's the doorway.
Right.
In the adult services world, well, it depends on your disability. Is the doorway the Department of Developmental Services? Is the doorway Department of Mental Health? Is the doorway only the Massachusetts Rehab Commission? And then there's Medicaid. So people really have to learn about a plethora of structures and agencies. And then the other part of it is, I think, which is very challenging, is what we were talking about earlier, like separating, okay, my son or daughter is going to need a group home, from what does your son and daughter really need, though, in the group home? I get that.
Right.
You think, and by the way, sometimes you may be wrong. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying. So it's really, I almost feel like in the adult world, when we get support programs involved, they have to have a lot of years' experience before we even have them on a team, because we could never train them in depth for, and they all have different specialties.
Right.
And then even in transition, they know enough to ask each other, you know, and there may be calls. You guys do the same thing, call each other. I have this situation, you know, so you're talking about everything from employment, you know, hopefully in school.
Right.
Their time was invested while it's an entitlement to see what's the best way of learning, you know, what's the best way of adapting.
Now, would you two, or as advocates, would you start working on this when they're about 14? Is this something that you would bring up?
Oh, we definitely bring it up, you know, because at that point, there's also a requirement for an additional document. In addition to the IEP, there should be a transition planning form. So that starts at age 14. The focus of the IEP changes from what everybody else on the team thinks ought to be happening to what is this child interested in doing when they leave school?
Right.
What's their life going to look like? What kind of recreation are they going to be doing? Who's, you know, do you have a medically complex child whose mother is always taking them to Children's Hospital for 14 different specialists? Who's going to manage that, right? You know, so it's all of those skills, all of those disability-related skills that we have to start getting in front of and figuring out how are we going to get this child ready to do that. You know, and sometimes I have to have it, I'm sure Ellen's had this conversation before, where you have the really tough conversation with the parents that goes like this: if, God forbid, you're not here, will this child be able to advocate for themselves? Will they be able to voice their own concerns, their wants, and their needs? And if so, what does that look like? And will they be able to manage their lives effectively without you there? And as we all know, we don't think about some of the things we do all the time, but a simple decision like, I have a cold today, do I know what I need to do? And do I know which medications may not actually work well with some of the medications that I take on a regular basis? Or, you know, if you're on a bus and, you know, and the bus breaks down and you have a child who has difficulty with regulating themselves, do they know how to respond to that situation? You know, so those types of things all have to be planned for, and it does take 6 months to train a child in all of those things. There's a long list of things we have to prepare them for.
Oh, right, I'm sure. And if self-advocacy alone, I mean, how can you tell at 14, 15, 16 if somebody is going to be able to be a self-advocate, you know, for themselves when they turn 22? I mean, who makes that decision?
Well, I don't think,
I think it's a process.
It's not an
I
if.
mean, I think, you know, we start, you know, hopefully before 14, or in, you know, Mass, we start at 14 to create a transition plan. And what, you know, what is the goal? Are they going to live independently? You know, are they going to be, or what are they going to do to be gainfully employed? Or who are they going to live with? So those are all the big questions that you just have to help formulate a plan with the family and the student.
Right.
And I think evolve is the perfect word for it. I also think you're not saying there's going to be no one there for this young man or woman, right? So it's more about boundaries, encouraging them to do as much as they can do for themselves, and then having in a family, having a backup plan. Who's that person in the family that can be in there? If there isn't a big family, oh my God, what can we think about? Circle of friends, network, right?
Yeah,
who can be there? And that's huge. I think that, you know, if families can do anything, I don't care how much money they have, whatever, it's having that sort of thought out, and, you know, who really gets it about their son or daughter.
It's building that sense of community.
Right.
You know, when the child turns 22, it shouldn't be the first time that people in their town knows that they exist.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right? You know, there should be relationships that have been built. There should be, you know, opportunities and plans in place so that that person is known in the town, that people, and so that there is a collaboration. You know, that whole "it takes a village" really takes on a whole different life when you have a child with a disability, because you really do have to create that village for them.
Right. One last question, because believe it or not, it's almost time. I was just wondering if any of you wanted to share any stories that you might have in reference to helping a particular individual. What empowered you the most? What empowered you or gave you a lot of joy to do for a client, for somebody that you represent?
For me, if I can leave a team meeting and feel like I make a difference, that I'm helping the family, that I'm helping the student, it's rewarding. I mean, and the other piece is it's about giving back. So I've, you know, hired my own advocate when I was not able to, you know, be effective as a parent, and it's just a great feeling to know that you can go to make a difference, to build a relationship, and to help figure out what this person needs so they can live independently.
For me, it's being invited to a child's graduation. high school graduation, and this was a child who was cutting and was afraid to go to school, and they had actually, we managed to get the right placement for them, and they're actually going to college, and they're actually pursuing their dream. I mean, that's what IDEA is all about, is being able to support them and to see them realize that dream.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah.
I have one a little more complicated because it's related to the lawsuit we did, waiting list lawsuit for people who were waiting for adult services. So in the middle of it, there was a 5-year plan. I get a call from someone who knew someone from Virginia. But her mother and brother lived here. And basically they were living like hermits. But the mother had had a stroke, was in the hospital. So this was the sister's chance to get something resolved. And she asked me about this delay, and I said, hold it, what's your name? What's your brother's name? Last name? And he was on the list, and the mother had refused, but it wasn't over yet. So she was able to then get involved. It's not your traditional story, but as a sibling, sort of saved the day for the brother.
Right.
And while the mother was in less than great, though she was 80-something, so she wasn't going to be able to support him much longer, and it wasn't a great situation, he was able to move in with someone and have a good life. So that's a fun story.
Well, I thank you all for being here today. With strong advocacy, individuals with disabilities can access needed supports and services crucial to living full and rewarding lives. Thank you for watching today. Join us next time on You're Not Alone, Surviving Your Child's Disability.